All right. Good morning, everyone, again, and warm welcome to those who are just joining us. We are confident that we are going to start in the next couple of minutes, and I want to welcome you sincerely to today's session. Meanwhile, there's been questions about when individuals will start making their presentations. I'd like to just relax. Definitely, your presentations will be taken today, definitely. So especially for those who were meant to present yesterday and they can't present yesterday. So just relax and very shortly you will be able to present. Mr. Christopher from Kogi State Polytechnic Lokoja, Mr. Abdul Christopher, you have 2 articles to present as you said in the direct message. I cannot categorically say that you'll be presenting at 9:40, but definitely you present today. We are hopeful that at 9:30 West African time, we will be starting with a keynote speech, a keynote from one of our keynote speakers. And at 10 o'clock West African time, we will start the roundtable discussion. We have 6 important researchers that have been invited as discussants for the roundtable discussions. And they will be right here to share their experiences with us as far as the resilience of the built environment is in the era of pandemic, learning from the lessons from COVID-19. So about plenary sessions, please calm down. You will definitely present. But for now, we are hoping to start in the next couple of minutes with the keynote from the one of our keynote speakers. And after that, hopefully, we should proceed to the roundtable discussion. So today is going to be quite heavy. It's going to be a little heavy for us. So let's just remain calm and ready to make our presentation. But most importantly, let us be ready to learn, to cross-fertilize ideas, to tap from the wealth of experiences of those who will be presenting here today. I can assure you again that every one of you will be presenting today. Thank you very much. So you're welcome. As you're coming in, feel free to introduce yourself through the chat. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know what you're doing. One of us already published a link to what he's currently doing, and I must say that's a great one. Others can always look you up online and know the research you're doing, and we can always enjoy some collaborative relationship. So as we are waiting for the Grand Crew in Minna, Nigeria to get set with the commencement of the keynote speech, I'd like to welcome you to today's session. And Michael Makongo has shared with us the link to his initiative. And of course, we are free to check it out. And of course, personally, I'm going to check it out and we can find a nexus between our research interests and we may look at what we may have to do together very shortly. So you're welcome, Engineer Afiz Abanda. You're welcome. We are pleased to have you here. So as you're coming in, please feel free to introduce yourself through the chat and others can easily get to know you and we can get to interact better with you. Thank you. I want to believe we cannot hear me. I think I'm seeing a message saying that there is no sound. Can you hear me, please? If you can hear me, can you give a wave or just speak up? Let me know you can hear me.
Loud and clear, loud and clear, loud and clear.
Oh, great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
I can hear you.
So I'm
Christopher
sure you
can hear you loud and clear from Lokoja.
So we are still waiting to get signals from the ground crew in Minna. And as soon as we do that, we'll commence the opening, the keynote for today. Mr. Christopher Abdul, you're welcome. I want to believe you're connecting with us from UTM in Malaysia. Can we hear your voice? Good morning.
Okay, presently I'm on a field survey, so I'm presently in Lokoja at the moment, Doctor.
Okay, I'm looking at the background that you're using, so yes, I thought you are in, yes.
I'm undergoing a research study there. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay,
okay.
Olibukun, can you confirm that you could hear my voice, please?
Yeah, Dr. Bilal, I can hear your voice loud and clear.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure we are ready for the keynote, please. Dr. Bilal is taking the keynote for this morning, and I'm quite excited that he's already with us. We are intending to start at 9:30, and we have just 2 minutes. So you're very welcome, Dr. Bilal. We are pleased to have you. And it's good to see your beautiful face again, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can hear you loud and
Pleasure
clear.
having you.
Yusuf
Yes, sir.
Right. Yusuf Amauchi, I can hear you loud and clear.
So we'll be starting now. Please, I want to plead with all of us to kindly mute our mic so that we can minimize the interference from sides. Please mute your mic if you're not on the floor. We hope to start in the next couple of minutes. Thank you. All right, by my watch, it's exactly 10:30 here in Windhoek, Namibia. I'm sure it's 9:30 in Nigeria, and we are starting right away. Dr. Bilal is an academic with the Department of Building, Federal University of Technology, Minna, and we are privileged this morning to be drinking from his wealth of experience as we'll be sharing a keynote on the resilience of the built environment in pandemic era. He will be speaking more specifically to the lessons from COVID-19, and he will be laying a solid foundation for the roundtable talk that will be coming up right after his presentation at 10 o'clock West African time. I'd like you to join me as we welcome Dr. Bilal to deliver the keynote for today's session. Dr. Bilal, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renuka, and permit me to stand on the protocol that was established yesterday. The Vice Chancellor, ably represented, the Dean of the Faculty of School of Environmental Technology, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, presenters, students, good morning. It's supposed to be a keynote speech on resilience of the built environment in pandemic era, talking about lessons from COVID-19. But of course, there should be some basics for which we'll be talking about to ensure that at least we have a foundation to create an enabling environment for us to understand what we are indeed talking about. So first, my table of contents here, I believe you could see that. One, we'll be looking at the resilience of the built environment, talking about the definition, resilience defined, disaster resilience itself, what about the framework's existence. They will also look at the resilience of the built environment. Of course, we have to talk about the built environment, the resilience therein. Then, of course, COVID-19 impact on the built environment. We'll be reflecting of the impact-proof built environment, and of course, virus-proof built environment. Talk about lessons from COVID-19. Basically, some would argue that COVID-19 is a disaster, while others will argue that it's an emergency, a global emergency. But of course, what indeed is an emergency? Several agencies have defined emergencies for us, and of course, they've said it's an incident or a series of incidents that could lead into severe damage, threaten this political order, government and business continuity, affect stability, security, human health, the environment, and of course, the economy. That has been defined as an emergency. Again, for those who classify what has happened or what is currently happening because it's still in existence as a disaster, then we need to talk about what the disaster is. Disaster has been defined, of course, from the literature and of course, other stakeholders as an incident or incident that has led to widespread damage, requiring cooperation of government and of course, the generality of society to ensure that there's effective, recovery. Now, if we look at these two things, there are some critical elements there or that we need to look into. One, there are incidents that cause damage or destruction. The damage could be, of course, economic, it could be physical, it could be all of that sort of damage we may want to consider. And in any case, it will require the cooperation or collaboration of government and other functions, to ensure that recovery is established. Summarily, it is a serious disruption in the functioning of the community. The community could be said to be, of course, in the case of pandemic, global, and in the case of epidemic, it could be, of course, some sort of local, community. The moment there is disruption in the function of that community that exceeds the capacity or the coping capacity of that the community outside of these resources, then of course that may be said to be disaster. Now, in this case, we talk about resilience because that's indeed our focus. Resilience basically has been defined by several researchers, agencies who have defined them based on context, indeed. And of course, it has been defined by FEMA, for instance, who defined as an ability to adapt to changing conditions, the ability to withstand, and of course, recovery. If you observed, this issue of recovery is at the forefront of some of this definition. Recovery from disruption emanating from either, of course, emergency or disaster, as the case may be. The changes that we may have certainly may emanate from natural events or natural hazard events. Of course, we have had acts of terrorism, pandemics, and we have it, and in some other cases, epidemic. So now, the Global Organization for Economic Cooperation has defined resilience as the ability of household, define it from the lower context, household, community, or even the upper context of our nations to absorb and recover from shocks. These shocks could be as a result of emergency, could be as a result of disaster, as the case may be, while they adapt and transform their structure. Certainly they must have existing structures, and of course their means of livelihood in the face of such stress. The UNHCR defines it as the ability of the system or community. If you look at all of this definition, the issue of community has been well stressed. Community or society that's exposed to hazard and the ability to resist, absorb, and accommodate, recover from the effect of this hazard. So basically, what are we talking about? Resilience is about ability to recover, from either emergencies or disaster, as the case may be. Now, let's connect the dots. Certainly, for disaster to happen or for emergency to happen, we'll be talking about some of these key factors that should, of course, exist. One, you look at the risk. Of course, you look at the hazard, you look at the force. There has to be an environment for some of these things to happen. And when there are triggering events could be as a result of social impact or social activities, physical, economic, or even political, activities. When it triggers with an existing environment where there is risk or where there is hazard, then that certainly would amount into a disaster. Of course, an emergency that you should need to, respond to it. When emergency now happens, there is response. Response must be provided to ensure that, the community affected by such, emergency recover. And we talk about recovery, there are different phases of recovery. In some cases, where there are no established platforms or structures, for recovery, then of course, such community may not necessarily even recover. In fact, they may even get worse. But in some other cases, you may have the case of transformation due to certain established standard that has been in place, or of course, ability to resist or bounce forward. You talk about bouncing forward, adapting to changes, adjusting into a new normal, or indeed even bouncing back better than it, of course, the community was. And in this case, when that happens, that is when you say, of course, there is resilience. Now, there is for resilience to take place, there certainly must be there are certain layers that we need to look at. One is being classified into two aspects of resilience. We have, of course, the engineering resilience. I will talk about the ecological resilience. The engineering will talk about critical infrastructure that's been affected. Certainly, we should have facilities that should ordinarily, based on established standards, should be able to recover from shocks. Again, from that, we have the technical systems, the products, the production processes that may have, and when these are technical systems. On the other side, we have ecological systems that will relate to the social and of course community resilience. Looking at social resilience and community resilience, so we're talking about economic resilience, talk about ability for community to bounce back having been affected, having their livelihood been affected, or even at individual level, their ability to bounce back, to recover from the impact of shocks, that would be classified as, of course, individual resilience. Again, you look at the organizational aspect of resilience in terms of local government, in terms of institutions, they must have certain basis, for them to, recover from disasters. Also, we talk about urban resilience, you have the rural resilience. When shocks happen, there certainly must be certain functions on the ground for recovery to take place. So basically, the resilience tree cuts across all of these facets. Talk about the resilience in itself, engineering resilience, or the economic resilience, and the sub of that, which will be looking at critical infrastructure resilience, or on the other side, the social and community resilience. Now, we talk about fundamentals, understanding resilience systems. Certainly when shocks happen, it is expected that communities or institutions or, of course, nations will have some existing plan, ongoing, or that in which they are following. But the moment shocks happen, shocks which could result from, of course, existing vulnerability of the community, threats, or the consequences, all of these, and their inability to absorb such shocks, their ability to absorb such shocks, and of course recover, recover back to the normal, would, of course, is what they call, these are some of the fundamentals of resilience. Again, we have the critical functionality. To have the V, which is classified into two. We have the V, shape, and of course, we have the U shape curve. Now, what are the elements? There are critical elements. When you talk about resilience, you have 4 critical elements that we must consider. One is the context. In the case of the context, we look on the social group. What is the context? The region for which that happens, their institution, the existing system, or the processes for which they exist. And the moment that disturbance comes into place, the disturbance may be due to natural hazard impact, it could be due to conflict, it could be due to pandemic, or of course, even epidemic, as we have it, food shortages, some of these crises. When it happens, it has to create, some sort of stress within, the existing system. So one is expected to have the capacity to cope with those disturbances, capacity to cope with exposure, sensitivity, your adaptive capacity, so that it can transform you into the ability to into an ability to bounce back, better than the system was. In some other cases where there are no basic, functions on ground, then the ability to bounce back may be lacking. And in some other cases, we have seen community, for instance, in the case of Haiti, following the 2010, earthquakes, you have some sort of collapse in the economy because they do not have established functions or systems in place to enable them to bounce forward. So I had spoken earlier about this tree, so I'll just go further to community resilience as defined. Again, it is the ability to, for any community, for nation, for institution, or organization to bounce back and recover from shocks using its own resources. But of course, it also is a bit of groups or communities to cope with external shocks, stresses that may result from social, environmental, or political change. And as the case we have it in the case of COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll talk about this COVID-19. What are the highlights of COVID-19? Just a recap so that we can at least know where we're coming from. COVID-19, we all know that it's an infectious disease, caused by, SARS-CoV-2. What are the impacts? Globally, we had over 754 million people affected. Fatalities recorded globally was more than 6 million. And of course, so far, we have had, vaccines, more than 30 billion administered to people in order to enable them to recover. In Nigeria here, we had a case of infected cases, recorded infected cases of 266,000. And of course, the case of fatalities, more than 3,000 cases. Again, you'll recall here, for those of us who are locals or Nigerians, you recall that the case, was reported sometime in 2020, February. And of course, that necessitates looking at the widespread of cases and the possible implication of such cases. Lockdown was instituted, and that was announced in March 2022, which commenced from Ogun, Lagos, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. So what are the impacts? The impacts of COVID-19 on the built environment has been classified largely into four. One, we have the social and economic impact. Talk about social impact. We had this issue of the lockdown, lack of movement, inability to reach out to families, those who ordinarily, will go to, social events. Schools were closed, offices were locked, marketplaces, businesses were locked. And all of this had, severe economic impact on locals, on persons, on community, and of course, at the local larger scale space. Talk about, hampering travels, businesses, communication, and all of that. Again, looking at the governance structures, you have that been changed. You have, again, innovative approaches coming on. For instance, in some cities, people started to think more about development of smart cities. Community-wise, you have impact about community factors, hair issues, talk about sensitivity of the virus to hair. You have to use nose mask, water resources issues. And of course, you have issue with transmission in urban design. There has to be changes in terms of transmission systems. Ordinarily, you would sit with your, colleague in a bus or in a plane, but all of those had to change. And that calls for some degree of designs that should come about. Talk about urban design changes in terms of how we transport, ourselves or movement from one point to the other. So these basically are some of the critical impacts of COVID-19 as it relates to, the built environment. Now, looking at the impact of COVID-19, developing COVID-19 and impact, providing an impactful built environment. Looking at what has happened, we must now begin to look at what are the immediate and precautionary measures that must be put in place when the pandemic or even epidemic, commences. In certain, as it were, in the case of COVID-19, there were quarantines, there were lockdowns put in place to ensure that hampers movement of persons or goods or services from one point to the other. Again, to mitigate the widespread, possibility or impact of COVID-19, the transmission from one person to the other, the policies of social distancing and physical distancing was actually put in place. And all of these would affected as it relates to, the built environment. And of course, practitioners in the built environment, affected how we do things. For instance, face-to-face engagement became limited. Cases such as presentation online began to become, in the new normal. Class that had to be in place, for instance, in advanced countries like the UAE, had to establish measures, for communication, standard process of communication to ensure that the system doesn't just get itself shut down. Again, some of the strategies that were put in place as precautionary measures had to do with the emergency architecture. You talk about design of hospitals, designs of health facilities that had to be put in place on emergency cases. We saw in China the development of health facilities that should be able to help accommodate affected patients. Such facilities will help to treat and quarantine patients. All of these had to be some quick strategy that were put in place by built environment professionals and together with policymakers and of course, health practitioners to ensure that there are precautionary immediate measures to mitigate, of course, the impact of, COVID-19. And that also can be applied to epidemic cases as we may have it in different localities. Again, remote services began operation following the, of course, because you couldn't just have, lockdown being in place. That has great economic impact. It has great social impact. So as a result, there were remote services that were, that was put in place. Stay-at-home regulation was in place. So transactions became online, distance lecturing, talk about academics. These were some of the policies that were and changes that had to come in place. In fact, in terms of housing design, people start to think about, their household sizes. You have to reduce the number of households, looking at in order to mitigate the transition rates. Social distancing level were thought about. Shared apartment or facilities were begun to. There was sort of redesign in terms of shared facilities. Then the crisis of housing in itself began to be looked into as by designers. Why? Is because you have to find means to mitigate the transmission of the virus. Again, following that, there were advanced development in terms of developing smart environments. We believe that with remote communication, facilities having to function on their own, improvement in terms of tourism, hospitality, education, and all of that. These began to enhance the performance of the built environment as against what would have happened if indeed there were no measures put in place. All of these are some of the strategies or measures that were put in place in the course of COVID-19 in order to enhance or to ensure that there was performance in the built environment. So these are some of the reflections that one will have to begin to look into. You have to think about people being smart, thinking about appropriate measures that could establish to ensure that community, the nation, or businesses even function, even when this issue of pandemic or epidemic are in place. You have, of course, several cities begin to spring up about smart cities. A typical example in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, where businesses, schools, all of these were in place to ensure that at least there's functioning of the system. The working habits changed. People start to communicate online. Smart buildings were in place. Smart interiors were in place. All of these were just to enhance the performance of the built environment, even in the course of pandemic. And these are some of the things that we must continue to look into in order to develop or advance on the existence or the establishment of the built environment. Now, let's look at how do we now provide virus-proof built environment, looking back into lessons of COVID-19. We understand that there are several cases of pandemic that have happened, several instances here in Nigeria of infectious diseases. You have cases of plague, you have cases of tuberculosis, you have cases of typhoid, cholera, and some of these flus that tend to happen. If this continues to be the case, does it mean that the function of the built environment will be a standstill? Certainly the question is no. One must begin to look inwards as to how best can we learn lessons from what has happened in the case of COVID-19, what is still happening in the case of COVID-19, and how best we could integrate it into existing structure to enhance the performance of COVID-19. Certainly within the old, between 2014 and 20th century, measures were in place, urban renewal reforms were done, sanitary reforms were done, housing reform were done, just to limit some of the, but were those sufficient? The answer then is no, because we have seen that in the course of COVID-19 pandemic, all of these didn't actually help to reduce the transmission rates of an infection rate of COVID-19. So what are the things we need to, what are the setbacks that we tend to have? What are the lessons that we learn from COVID-19? One, we look at urban approaches. But of course, within us, we have urban planners, we have architects. What are the approaches that you can begin to put in place to ensure that there are changes within the urban system? Talk about expansion horizontally. You have reducing the density of cities. For instance, Lagos is one city where we had a series of cases because of the structure of the density, the dense nature of the city. All of this must begin to now come into play to ensure that we reduce the numbers, ensure that those who are within the rural areas begin to have functioning systems to discourage them from, of course, migrating into cities. You have cases of decentralization in terms of even position of authority. As leaders within certain organizations, you must begin to look inward as to how to decentralize, command and control structures. Talk about urban farming systems, building farming within your home, ensuring that you have fewer cars, fewer buses on the road, and a bit of taking other measures to ensure that at least we have some sort of improvement in the urban system. Well, some of these are some of the issues that we tend to have. There are the drawbacks. In terms of the architectural approach, we have self-sufficient strategies. Some of these are not so effective. Refocusing on green spaces. These are some of the challenges that we tend to have. Several low-rise buildings. We have to look into that as to how to rather better put in place some sort of other forms of buildings, and of course, issue of quality. Now, what is the step forward? We look at advancement in technology. Technology has enhanced our ability to perform as members of the built environment within this. For instance, we have this presentation. The fact that the e-learning system, e-learning platform were put in place, e-communication system were put in place, help indeed to reduce the shock or the impact of COVID-19. So we need to emphasize more on the impact of technology, digitalization, enhancing performance in terms of how we work, ability to work from home, bringing in place artificial intelligence, touchless smart technologies. All of these are some of the things we may begin to look into, as practitioners and researchers of the built environment to help to enhance our performance. or the performance of the built environment. So these basically are some of the drawbacks were presented in terms of urban approach. So I would expect that some of us as urban planners will begin to look inwards as to what are the lessons that we need to take home from this COVID-19 situation, so that when this kind of a case arises again, which will always do, because there's prediction that is going to come back, I will have something similar to what we have had, and as a result, we must prepare better to ensure that there's indeed resilience, because resilience is largely based on preparedness. Where there's preparedness, then when there are shocks, you bounce back, and it's expected that you'll quickly recover from the impact of those shocks. So again, as architects, what are we looking at? Our design approaches, are they sufficient? The question is no, we need to make advances in terms of how we think, how we design, how we can ensure that our design are virus-proof, so that it enhance the functioning of the users of such space. We have to refocus on our spaces in terms of utilization, and we believe that with some of these things, it will help us in reducing the impact of pandemic or epidemic, as the case may be. As constructors, builders, quantity surveyors, what are we looking at? We may begin to change our system from the normal or traditional process of having several people on a site working within an enclosure or working within a small space, such that at least we can. We had a similar case, for instance, in Ilorin, where a construction site was in place, and several people within that small space got infected within a very short, limited time. So how do we enhance performance on construction sites? One is to begin to think about the strategy for construction. So we may begin to look at modular construction system. Of course, that has its own drawbacks. But what are the advantages as it relates to COVID pandemic situation, or indeed epidemic situation? We must begin to look at some of the, as technologies, some of the elements that we may create. Talk about lightweight structures, adaptable structures. Importantly, our buildings hygiene. All of these are some of the things we have to put in place as constructors to ensure that we develop resilience to cases of pandemic or epidemic, as the case may be. So like I said earlier, the case of technology has really helped in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And we believe that the application of some of these digital processes or digital process or technology, this will help us to at least function better within the built environment. It will enable the built environment to perform better even in the face of COVID-19. Summarily, and in conclusion, aside of the great human and social economic losses that was recorded in the case of COVID-19, the functioning of the built environment was actually impeded. It was impaired, and as a result, we wouldn't want this to repeat itself. In Nigeria, we have had series of cases of epidemic from one state to the other. The issue of pandemic, it has been reported, or it's been said that it's going to really repeat itself. So what lessons have we learned? Or what lessons are we learning? We have seen cases of buildings put in place in fewer number of days, the use of more equipment and technologies. What policies, or what lessons have we learned to ensure that the function of the built environment continue to be in place even when we have a similar situation? While lessons has been learned from disaster, policymakers, researchers, practitioners, and other stakeholders like myself and you all must ensure the development of sustainable policies. We must drive policy making through research, innovative strategies, and ensure that we put in measures that could be applied to mitigate the recurring impact of pandemic and, of course, epidemic, as we would have it in our local community. This certainly would ensure that the built environment performs optimally and functional, and of course, it will help it to function based on indeed the basis for which it was established. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bilal, for that beautiful keynote. We are very much grateful for that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us and for giving us access to your robust experience. We have learned so much from this. Of course, we're a couple of minutes behind schedule, but I would like to take some responses or about 1 or 2 questions for the speaker. If you have questions, if you can just accommodate maximum of 2 questions before we proceed to the roundtable talk. I can see that our discussants are already online. So can we just take 1 or 2 questions? If you have a question for Dr. Bilal, will you just kindly raise your hand so that we can take your question? Dr. Bilal has spoken on the resilience of the built environment in pandemic era, and he has spoken from the lessons from COVID-19 in general perspective, especially from the built environment lens. So, and this has set the ball rolling for the roundtable talk. Is a great foundation for the roundtable talk as we begin to learn lessons from different cities, different countries around the world from the experience of our discussants. But if you have questions for Dr. Bilal, can we just take some 1 or 2 questions, please? Please, do we have questions? All right, if there are no questions, because of our time, I'll be handing over to Dr. Ogunbode Ezekiel and Mr. Gbenga Keji, who are on the grant team in Minna in Nigeria, as they will be moderating the roundtable talk. So, Dr. Ezekiel, are you there? Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Ezekiel?
Yes, good morning. He's here. We are here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll quickly move into the roundtable section. And this is how it will go. From here, we are going to introduce the panelists. Then 2 out of the 6 panelists we have will share the experience of the institute and the organization they represent in relation to the subject matter, after which we go into the crosstalk. In the crosstalk, we are still going to share in form of a sharing experience of what we do at the various departments and individual on the subject matter. Then after which we go into questions and answers. I think that would be good for us in order to save time. Yes, quickly we go into the introduction of our panelists. We have before us Professor James O.B. Rotimi. He's an academic dean from the School of Built Environment, College of Sciences at Marseille University of New Zealand. You are welcome, Professor James B. Rotimi. Also close to him, we have Professor O.A. Kemiki. Professor Kemiki is the immediate past head of Department of Estate Management at the Federal University of Technology, Minna, Nigeria here. You are welcome, Prof. We also have who is the founder of the Institute of Global Sustainable Futures. And she's also working with Lancashire University in the UK. You are welcome, ma. We have also Dr. Gulamo Delgado. Dr. Delgado is a senior lecturer in the Department of Architecture. He's also the acting director at the Institute of Land, Livelihoods and Housing at the Namibia University of Science and Technology in Namibia. You are welcome, sir. We have here also Associate Professor Babafemi A.J. He is the head of Construction Materials Unit of Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And lastly, we have our own brother, Dr. Yakubu Aminu Dodo. Dr. Aminu Yakubu Dodo is from the Architecture Department of College of Engineering, Najran University, Saudi Arabia. You are all welcome, sir. So we move on from there. I don't know if Dr. Renuka is here with us. So we want her to share from experience what Global Sustainable Future is all about, and what are you doing in relation to preparation for pandemic in our built environment. If you are here, ma, you have 5 minutes to speak to us. You can take over the floor, ma.
I am here. Thank you very much. Benga, thank you very much for inviting me here. I would like to share a TED Talk of our Global Sustainable Futures Progress to Partnership Network. It is only 5 minutes, if that is okay.
Yes, you can go ahead, ma. Go ahead, ma. Sorry, Dr. Renuka is sharing her slides.
Despite very significant development gains globally, which has raised many millions of people out of absolute poverty, there is substantial evidence that inequality between the world's richest and poorest countries is widening. Today, the world has become more complex, and poorer countries have experienced significant economic and social development. However, the inequalities within countries have also been growing, and some commentators now talk of a global north and global south, referring respectively to richer and poorer communities which are found within and between countries. There are many causes of these inequalities, including the availability of natural resources, different levels of health and education, the nature of country's economy and its industrial sectors, international trading policies and access to markets, how countries are governed and international relationships between countries, conflict within and between countries, and a country's vulnerability to natural hazards and climate change. So most importantly, researchers are called upon to address the barriers to climate science in the global south. These culturally diverse nations of global south are united by common threats to their sustainable futures. Challenges faced in creating collaborations, partnerships across national borders and academic disciplines. Through Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnership Network, we want to play a leading role in creating an inclusive, collaborative, innovative, and engaging platform for early career researchers and like-targeted stakeholders, including startups and entrepreneurs, supported by experienced senior researchers and business leaders, where everyone can share in their research, innovation, visualization, and enthusiasm in parallel to network success. Our fundamental objective is to create a strong research environment, building to a multidisciplinary and multisectoral team of endogenous professionals that would be capable of pursuing and utilizing participatory and integrative approaches in solving public and environmental sustainability problems. Therefore, our priorities are empowering and capacity building, working with researchers to empower communities and individuals, increase independence and support to those who need it, give researchers and stakeholders the legacy of sustainable practices, fair and inclusive, improve economic and social and environmental equality, pursuing development which offers fair distribution and access to good quality life and working conditions. Networking and engagement provide an innovative and global-wide platform to make global sustainable futures progress through partnership network, an effective and well-connected network, transforming traditional society systems to more sustainable systems, And above all, it is sustainability. So co-create sustainable and resilient development pathways to secure sustainable futures for all and everyone. So the key focus is mobilization and engagement, building a community of practice, creating a strong leadership, and producing a critical mass of good practices. 800 coordinators from 105 countries have joined me. So I also call upon you to join us and co-create sustainable futures together. So this is what we are as a global sustainable futures network. However, we have grown with this video was made in April 2020. So now we have grown to 3,000 coordinators from 147 countries. So I'm proud of that. And I'm very thankful to all of them who have joined us. Now, this was the product of actually COVID-19, and I will talk more about it as I think my time is finished, but during the round talk, this round, I will definitely explain more about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Renuka. I must also include that Dr. Renuka has been helping us, supporting us technically here in FET Minna, and she's always open for more collaborations. If any of the participants feel like get in touch with her, please, you can do so. So let's keep all our questions for her until the end of the presentation. Thank you. We quickly move to Dr. Delgado. Dr. Delgado, want to hear from you as well. If you are here, please take over. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Delgado is available. We are waiting for him, please.
Not yet, we can't hear him.
We can't hear you, Dr. Delgado. He's working on his system, please.
I will ask him to rejoin. So probably then we will be able to hear. We can ask someone else to come over for now.
Probably while waiting for him to come on, we can call on Professor James B. Rotimi to please speak to us. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof.
Okay, good morning. It's actually very late here. It's about 10 p.m. At my base here. Well, I probably just need to start with a little correction. I was introduced as the academic dean for the College of Sciences. I am no longer the academic dean. I stepped down in 2021. So my term ran out in 2021. So I'm currently just an academic within the School of Built Environment at Massey University. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the keynote that we've had. It was brilliantly put together, and there seems to have said a lot of the things that I had in mind to say about the impact that COVID has had on us as individuals and to the built environment practitioners. I guess just trying to emphasize when we talk about resilience, from what we have had, it's all about the capacity of the built environment to withstand pandemics and any such disruptions to things, and not just being able to withstand. If at all we're impaired, our ability to recover quickly from such pandemics. So really, Dr. Bilal has covered most of the things.
Thank you, Prof.
But I just want to touch on, resilience and the expectations for us as built professionals, and for us to realize that under the current situation where we have a new normal, we would need to adapt in many different dimensions. Dr. Bilal had talked about the urban environment. He talked about the changes required in terms of us being adaptable and things like that. And I guess that's where this should, as professionals, this is where we need to come in. What sort of response should we, in our own little way, have to cope or to recover quickly from such disasters when they occur in the future? I am foremost an academic, and for us in the academia, we've had to quickly move from face-to-face lectures to teaching remotely, and suddenly we had to learn how to use some technologies that we hitherto were not familiar with. And we see that some of those technologies have actually become very prominent now. Even the Zoom we're using now was something that wasn't this advanced, but it's advanced as a result of COVID. So I guess there's room for us to discuss these things later on, but basically it is the level of our adaptability. I think that's what we should be focusing on. And also, as we're preparing to be adaptable, we need to be futuristic about things, because before COVID, nobody knew that there will be such a wide-scale destruction. And I believe that COVID is just the beginning. There might be situations where we'll need to even need to adapt even more. So I'm just gonna stop here, and then maybe when we get into the proper discussion session, we'll be able to share some of our thoughts, some of our experiences from different locations. Thank you, organizers. Back to you, Dr. Boredi-Keji.
Okay, you're done, Prof. Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate that. So we'll be waiting for more questions for you from the participants later. Thank you. I think Dr. Delgado is now ready.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Take over, please, sir.
Yes, good.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. I prepared a short presentation. I will try to do it in 5 minutes. It's just to present the experiences that we have on the side of Namibia with regards to COVID-19 and the built environment. Would that be okay?
Yes, please.
Very well. So thank you very much for organizing this. My name is Guillermo Delgado. I coordinate the activities of the Institute for Land, Livelihoods and Housing at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. What we try to do is to bring the expertise that exists in the university and in locally and internationally around these issues. So I will share my screen. I hope you can see what I'm projecting. Very briefly, this project was a collaboration with a number of partners, the Shack Dwellers Federation of Namibia, local authorities, civil society organizations, and the government, central government. We received support from the German Cooperation Agency, and we had a team of students that helped to produce all this. We started during the pandemic in Namibia. As you know, most of the cases happened in urban areas, and housing became the first defense of COVID. So in Namibia, we decided that we have already very good base groups already working on issues of community-based led development. So how were these groups experiencing COVID, and what were the strategies happening? So these are the members of what in Namibia we call the National Alliance for Informal Settlement Upgrading. So this was a project that we did as a university in partnership with all these stakeholders. When the pandemic started in Namibia, the first response was very, let's call it conventional, the distribution of hand sanitizers, the building of improvised water tanks, the distribution of free water by local authorities, and trainings. But we said, what are the strategies that are coming bottom up? So we decided to work together to find which were those. It took us quite a while to start. So even though we started already conceptualizing before there were many cases, actually before there were any cases in the country, by the time that the unit started operations, the curve had been flattened. So at that time, we asked, does it really make sense to basically look back at what happened, or do we look at the future? So through a series of consultative meetings throughout the country, we went to different places and asked basically two things. First of all, what happened and what did you do? And secondly, what do you think will happen? And what do you think can be done about that? So we received a number of so we drafted a whole number of scenarios, which we then workshopped with a number of inhabitants in these different local authorities. So the consequences, I'm not going to go through them, but were significant. Actually, they were in many cases devastating. But the ideas were actually quite interesting, because as it turns out, much of the help from central and local government did not really reach the poorest. So what we discovered was that actually some of the most basic measures were the ones that were most impactful. Which are these? Radio programs. And beyond TV, beyond internet, beyond social media, in Namibia, there's very little penetration of smartphones, and the cost of data is extremely high. So radio became the information tool for people to basically have more information in these times of uncertainty and fear. And community gardens became widespread. Basically, going in a way, a very simple thing such as growing your own crops became what really you could say eventually saved lives in many instances. So we gathered a lot of data. We're still in the process of analyzing. We developed a number of information material together with the colleagues from international networks, but there's still a lot that can be done with information that we gather. I conclude with 5 final reflections. First of all, that the resilience of the built environment in the experience of Namibia relies a lot on ongoing social processes on the ground. The second is that these processes on the ground are not good to have, but in many instances they offset the absence of capacity and in local and central government. Low-tech, simple measures in many instances are the ones that make a difference. The fourth one is that the cost benefit of the measures to mitigate the disaster, in this case, the pandemic, actually were probably much more damaging than what could have been to basically not do a lockdown in Namibia. So the cost benefit needs to be evaluated. Partnerships, local governments with communities seem to be, as it has happened before the pandemic, and the pandemic confirmed it, happen to be actually an adequate form of engagement to create some form of resilience. And the last one is to caution with the use of the word resilience as a designator for the built environment, because it kind of suggests that if an environment is resilient, one can do harm to it again, which is something that is not desirable. Especially in this case, like the COVID-19 support unit that focused on inhabitants of formal settlements. And that's it. This is just a short input from my side. I
Sorry, Dr. Delgado is offline. So
yes,
maybe
no, I am
preparing
online.
to come up again. Okay,
Yes, I am online. I think it was somebody else that had their microphone on, but I'm done.
It's gone again.
No, it's on. It's on.
Okay.
He's online. Dr. Delgado is online. He's through with his presentation. We just had some network glitches there.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Delgado. We'll still come back to you for questions. We quickly move to the next presenter. We call on Associate Professor Babafemi from Stellenbosch University, South Africa. Please take over, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you live. Thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this conference. And I'd like to appreciate the organizers and particularly to thank our last presenter, the keynote speaker, I think Dr. Bilal. That was quite insightful. So from what we have heard, based on the keynote speech of Dr. Bilal, I think he's done a very good work looking at resilience and the lessons that we have learned from the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm Professor Adewumi Babafemi from Stellenbosch University. And I also like to correct, I'm not the head of the construction material unit. I was the group head of structural engineering and civil engineering informatics, but the department has been restructured, so we don't have it in that form anymore. So I am now the package, what they call the package coordinator of the structures division. So there have been different responses which we have learned from and we keep learning from, because the pandemic is not over. I'm a material specialist, and basically my research focus is based on sustainable concrete materials. One very important thing we need to remember, from COVID-19 was that facilities were stretched. Our hospitals, as a result of increased number of infection. I think in Africa, South Africa had the highest infection rate in sub-Saharan South Africa. So hospitals, clinics, were quite stretched, such that there was no facility to accommodate the number of people that were infected by COVID-19. And of course, makeshift hospitals and clinics had to be built to be able to cater for people. And in fact, some people were actually placed on the corridors of some of the health centers or hospitals just to be able to cater for them. And then, of course, some COVID prevention centers or control centers were also built. So if we're looking at it from the material perspective, sustainable infrastructure, I think Dr. Bila also mentioned that sustainable infrastructure, smart infrastructure is very, very important. If you permit me, I'll quickly share my screen. This was one of our presentations just to show us what we are doing here at Stellenbosch University, South Africa. I hope you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Yes,
Coming up.
yes, coming up.
So yeah, so we've been working on sustainable infrastructure.
Good now.
South Africa, as maybe some of us may know, with some developing African countries, urban squalor is a major challenge. And when COVID-19 hit, of course, the impact was quite significant. So for us at Stellenbosch University Department of Civil Engineering, in the late, I think 2018, we started looking at 3D concrete printing. Perhaps some of us must have heard about this mathed construction method against the traditional method, where within 2 days, in fact, you can, depending on the size of the building you are looking at, a building can be standing within a day or 2 days. Maybe if you look at, okay, placing the roof and then other fittings, then maybe you are looking at 3 days. So this is one measure I believe can address some of the lessons or some of the challenges that we had with COVID-19 or the pandemic. And the structures that will be built from 3D concrete printing are not just going to be temporary structures, but they are structures that can continue to be in use even after that pandemic. So we have been looking at circularity in sustainable infrastructure, and these are some of the team from the Sustainable Infrastructure Center. And then for those of us, I'm in the unit for construction materials. We also have some colleagues at the structural fire engineering, because of course, from this, from the buildings, we have to look at the fire performance, because fire is also one major disaster that is common, globally. So we have had students over the years. You can see the increase of our student intake. And this is not, I'm not talking about the entire postgraduate students, but students who have been working on 3D concrete printing, particularly looking at the utilization of waste in high volume. Our numbers continue to grow. And I want to say, and to those of us in Nigeria and other developing countries, we might think that we need to buy a 3D printer, which is really quite expensive. I think Cobalt is the main manufacturer of 3D concrete printer. But interestingly, we have 2 3D concrete printers at the moment, and these printers were actually built from scratch by our PhD, by our students. So civil engineering student, non-mechanical engineering student. So I believe we can take up that challenge. All components were procured locally, and then the 3D concrete printer was built. So we have seen significant progress with our research. And last year we won a European grant, quite a huge one, which the project is the project Recycle Beam, where we are looking at all locally available materials, industrial waste, agricultural waste, and looking at the use of this waste as a component or materials for 3D concrete printing to make it as green as possible. When the technology came to be, we discovered that the cement content of the 3D concrete mixture was quite high. And when we're looking at climate change and the impact of cement manufacture, we need to look at ways to lower significantly the content of cement in the 3D concrete mixture. So this project, we are really quite busy with this project now. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but the point I'm trying to make is that with the impact of COVID-19, 3D printing technology is one very, very proactive measure when our hospitals are stressed, like the presenter rightly mentioned. It's been predicted that we're still going to have pandemic, even though we pray it doesn't happen, but is it reality? And we need to begin to think ahead. And sub-Saharan African countries, sub-Saharan countries have a lot of waste. You can see from the slide, agricultural waste, industrial waste, even recycled plastic. One of my master's students that graduated just last December, he used recycled plastic as aggregate, to replace natural sand in 3D printed concrete. And the result was quite fascinating. So I think this technology, 3D concrete printing, is one way where you can build a house. You can print a house within 1 to 3 days. And from sustainability analysis that we have done and low cost life cycle analysis, apart from the cost that is cheaper, even though the initial capital is quite significant, but once the machine is developed, the printer is developed, that's it. It's overall, the cost of production is quite significant, about 20% less than traditional construction. Number two is that it's almost zero waste as against conventional construction or traditional construction. And then buildings can be erected as quick as possible within a day, and not only that, the structures that are built can even after the pandemic can continue to be used for other purposes. South Africa has significant amount of urban squalor. And if you look at those areas, they are really well crowded. So that aggravated the infection rate when COVID-19 came. But with 3D printed houses, new environment, new land can be procured where houses can be built, meeting all of the green building criteria, proper ventilation, and the houses are well spaced. And then the squalor can be demolished over time as you move people to this new environment. The urban squalor can be demolished and then new houses printed, which of course invariably is going to impact significantly on the housing shortage. So I'm going to leave it here for us to, when we get to the discussion, should we have any question, that 3D concrete printing, it now appears so clearly to us that is the future of construction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Associate Professor Babafemi, for this presentation. Thank you. As you have said, we will be waiting for comments and questions at the end. At this time, we will quickly move on to the next speaker. We call on Dr. Yakubu Aminu Dodo for his speech. Thank you. You are welcome on board, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. I already delivered my guest lecture yesterday, looking at how green buildings and adaptable infrastructures, the roles they play during the COVID-19. In a summary, what I have to say before we move into the roundtable is that the pandemic is what we already that providing the roundtable in inspirational space that is safe, but also crucially helps it meaning architecture in itself, originality is supposed to be a system. 2010 and early Shepard till 2015. In their research, they stated that it's widely acknowledged that resilience is generally advanced in institutional terms each time that a government or a community acts with disaster, like what we just had, is soon to be learned. I will buttress with what the last speaker says. With the three, there is room for some improvement. There is room to, I will go for us to be prepared from the lesson we have learned. In addition to my presentation yesterday, I would like to say that resiliency does not only involve the structure itself, it involves the entire community. If you see my slide yesterday, I said that we need to look into a new green infrastructure, green social infrastructure. It does not lie with construction only. It also lies with the way we live our life, with the way we approach people and the way we teach. We take an example from a current research we are into. During the pandemic, we found out that teaching was disrupted. A lot of things were at standstill. But for some community, for some segment, for some part of the world that we are ready for this, before now we had what we call the blended learning, whereby teaching, I will give example, teaching, when you have blended learning, 30% will be online, 70% will face-to-face. Those community that have this process of blended learning find it easy to move from the face-to-face to the virtual learning. And we had a research in such a way that courses like medicine, architecture, can you be virtual? Can you have a real time? So I will pause here, and during our discussion, if there are questions, and I will answer. Thank you very much. We have a real time, so I will pause here, and during our discussion. Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Now we can, but it appears there was actually a break in transmission at some point, please.
Okay. Yes, Prof. Bilal, you wanted me to recap. Is that what you were saying?
Yes,
I can see your message here. Somebody asked me to recap. Yes, I said yesterday I've had my presentation. My presentation was on green buildings and adaptable infrastructure roles they played during the pandemic. We find out that it was tremendous with the areas whereby availability of these green buildings, because when we're talking about green buildings, we are looking at codes, we are looking at standards that helps in this resiliency. So most of the areas that have put in this code, that have this code available, you find out that it was easier for some buildings to be adaptable. From my slide yesterday, I showed how containers were transformed, how open spaces like stadium were transformed into isolation center, how buildings were easily converted into isolation spaces. And I said, in my conclusion in my presentation yesterday, that the pandemic, inspirational space that is safe, inspirational space that is safe, but always crucially healthy for those that use it. If you look at this quotation, it is in line with the common definition of a green building. A green building is a building that provides less harm to the environment and keep its occupants safe. If we relate green buildings with coronavirus, which we know most of because it has to do with the air droplets, one criteria in green building is indoor air quality. From the indoor environmental quality, one of the major criteria, mostly more point is attached to this. You'll find out that there is this need for effective air exchange, effective air quality. With this, you'll find out that there's less amount of transmission of these errors. The other point is that Young T10 and Lee Shepard 2015, they both agree that it is widely acknowledged that resilience is generally advanced in institutional terms. Each time that a government or a community has an experience with disaster, there is always something to be learned. So that's my case now, and we'll meet in the round table.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dodo, for that presentation. Thank you so much. The moderators, both Dr. Ezekiel and Mr. Morenkeji seems to be having some technical issues with the internet connectivity, but I'm sure they will become stable very shortly. Meanwhile, I will stand in for them as they try to get things fixed. Thank you so much for your presentation, and not to waste time, we'll come back to you shortly when we are done with the presentation from each of the discussants. I think next on the list is Professor Olurotimi Kemiki from the Department of Estate Management and Valuation, Federal University of Technology, Minna. Professor Kemiki, are you online currently? Are you with us? Okay, I can see Professor Kemiki online. Professor Kemiki, are you there?
I
think Professor Kemiki is having some issues with his.
Can you hear me now?
Trying to connect.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Professor Kemiki. Thank you.
A very good morning to
us,
our moderator.
I think Professor Kemiki is also experiencing some issues.
Emerging property management strategy in a pandemic. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can. You can go ahead. You can go ahead, sir.
Very good morning. And very quickly, I'll be talking on emerging property management strategy in a pandemic era. I will not be talking as a professor. I will rather be talking as a professional estate surveyor and valuer who is well involved in real estate practice. And I will be looking at how we were able to put through during the pandemic era in Nigeria and the lesson for us. In Nigeria, we have a structured property management whereby we have the investors, who is normally called the landlord or the property owner, and we have professional manager who manages this property on behalf of the landlord. And of course, we have the tenant. So we'll be looking at the lessons for both the investor, the property manager, and of course, the tenant that we were able to receive during the pandemic era. One of the lessons has to do with new information for us. Prior to this time, some of our multi-tenanted property, most especially commercial space, in Nigeria, we have both residential and commercial space that we manage. And for commercial space, you can have a building of about, let's say, 15 tenants, and you have maybe 250 kVA generator. We are issue of power supply in Nigeria. So you have about 250 kVA generator or 500 kVA generator that services 15 tenants at a go. But during the pandemic, you now have one or two occupants who struggles to come to the office, and you are still using the same diesel and the same capacity to service just one or two tenants. And also, another new information has to do with the fact that it behoves on us now that it is necessary for us to ensure the possibility of loss of income, because during the pandemic era, most of the landowner has loss of income. Some of these tenants could not pay their rent due to one reason or the other. So there is need for them to have insurance against the loss of income. And the tenants too, you will also agree with me that during the pandemic era, there were some kind of tension in the country because human beings were restricted, no movement, loss of income, loss of jobs, loss of employment. So it created a kind of tension in the system. And when tension is created, it leads to upheaval, and you can have damages and riots. So it is also necessary for tenants or occupants to ensure their business premises. Another lesson has to do with new skills. We also have to develop new skills of managing property. Among the new skills, which has to do with best practices, has to do with deploying virtual platform for us to interface with our tenant, making bank payments online, sending lease and agreements online, using telephone. Our phone became a very powerful tool. And we also have means of monitoring our security guard right from our home, having our CCTV connected to our desktop. We also have new technology, drones being deployed using Google Map and the likes. We also have new process. You see, before now, you see a tenant, you see having a big space that is not fully utilized. So the pandemic era gave us another opportunity for workers to have what you call co-working. They work independently, but they share the same facility and space. The same facility and space, you put your table here, you are doing your work, I put my table here, I am doing my work. We also have another dimension, dynamics that played out during the pandemic era. And one of the dynamics that played out has to do with us avoiding the same set of tenants in a particular area. For example, when you have a block of tenants and all is occupied by students and students are not on grant, so it creates a kind of pressure on managing that kind of accommodation. So generally, during the pandemic era, we've been able to learn new information, new skill and best practices of property management, new technology, e-platform, multiple listing services. If you want an accommodation, you go to the multiple listing services, you pick the one you like, you make online payment, we check you online. Then new technology and the new process. So these are some of the lessons that we learned in Nigeria as regard the emerging property management strategy in a pandemic era. Even though the pandemic has come to an end, even without the pandemic, some of these lessons, we are still sustaining them, we are still using them because we have found out that it reduces the cost of doing business. Thank you and good morning.
Yeah. Are you done, Prof?
Yes.
Oh, that's great, sir. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Did you hear me?
Yes, we have.
Hope I wasn't talking to myself.
No, we had you, sir. We had you, Prof.
Thank you.
We had you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Yeah. I think we now open floor for comments, questions, and answers. And we are going to have like 5 minutes each for our presenter, our panelists to respond to questions and answers. If anyone is asking questions, please let us know who you are directing it to. So we open floor now for the question. You can ask any question as long as they are related to the subject matter, and they will be ready to answer. Thank you. If you have your question, you can indicate by raising your hand up. We'll call on you, you will ask. Thank you.
Mr. Ankeli is ready to, is raising his hands of Dr. Ankeli.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me quickly, I've seen Dr. Santali, you're raising up your hand. But before then, let's call on the LOC chairman for SETIC2022. He has a little contribution to the topic that we have at hand. So I'm calling on...
thank you very much, Professor Kemiki, for that beautiful presentation. We are most grateful for your presence. And we want to collectively wish you a wonderful inaugural lecture tomorrow and to extend our congratulatory messages to you. Thank you so much for still finding time to come, even when you are getting set for your inaugural tomorrow. Thank you. We had...
all the roundtable discussants. Indeed, every one of us are getting to have issues on areas where we would like to contribute. This is a roundtable talk. Unlike guests, lecture and keynote speakers, we expect contributions from audience, we expect questions. It ought to be an interactive section. Permit me to specifically say we appreciate Professor Kemiki despite his tight schedule. He still had time available to be part of this Hello, are you with me? So as I was saying, we appreciate Professor Kemiki for creating time, despite his tight schedule, to be with us at this roundtable talk. I want to invite everybody within Minna to be there tomorrow to grace the occasion. I'm sure he will have more to tell us, even as regards his inaugural session. Professor Femi just told us more about, he just talked to us about 3D printing, especially for construction activities. I'm sure he has posed a challenge for us, especially those of us in Nigeria, to look at the angle of 3D printing and what the use of available materials could do to reduce the volume of cement in use. I want to appreciate Dr. Bilal for a very loaded keynote speech. You know, I was saying he has really given a good ground for our roundtable discussion, and I expect everybody that was at this, that was part of the keynote speech, to have one thing or the other to raise. He mentioned issues that goes around the world. It took some time to talk about the environment in Nigeria and how we interacted during COVID and how it affected our activities. Dr. Renuka, you have been like a support indeed for this conference. And I'm sure your global, sustainable global futures will be a body that we will want to work with effectively for the future. Permit me to acknowledge Dr. Gonello. I was discussing with Dr. Ajayi that definitely after this conference, we at FUT will need to see what we can do more together. Sincerely speaking, the conference to reach to the extent that we can contribute our own quota. It's expected to be a 3.
I think Dr. Lawi's network is quite bad and we can't hear him.
Oh, but we can hear from here.
Hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
Like,
yes, we are hearing you.
That we should ensure we have our own individual contributions at this roundtable talk. Dr. Bilal, my concern is, what do you think our research on sustainable materials could do to help make more houses available and possibly create less crowded environment, which will in one way or the other enhance good living? Thank you, while I give room for others to continue. Ezekiel.
I think that's remark or comment I would say.
Please, can you give me respect to Dr.
Yes, one, I'm aware that we have I'm aware that we had very severe logistic issues in the course of the pandemic. You know, projects were hampered because most of these resources in terms of materials and equipment were largely important, particularly in Nigeria. And the regulation put in place by policymakers in different countries affected, you know, the importation or supply of
Hello,
materials.
can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can. Dr. Lawi, I'm responding to your comment, I guess.
Dr. Ajayi. Dr.
Yes,
Bilal.
we can hear you clearly.
Hello, do I have the floor, please?
Yes, you have the floor.
Okay, yes. What I was saying, you did mention or asked how we could, you know, channel our research towards producing sort of materials, I guess, that would enhance the delivery of, I think, say building or so in the course of COVID-19. Am I correct? Dr. Lawdi, would you like to recap? Dr. Lawdi, yes. I can't hear you.
Yes, I said, in what way do you think our research on sustainable materials can help improve the living condition, reducing crowded environments, and probably having places of good sanitation?
Yeah, I think there are two angles to that. One, talking about sustainable materials, it is important because currently, particularly in Nigeria now, we lay emphasis on materials that are imported and not necessarily sustainable. And regulations that were put in place in the course of the pandemic, when the pandemic was really active, actually affected supply chain. So that hampered to some extent continuity in terms of construction projects. So one would want to believe that if you are able to, convert, I would say, your research, which is largely off shelf, into practice, and that is in the market, I believe that would enhance the provision of some of these elements to facilitate construction. I also think that one of the issues that was raised is that you have this rural-urban migration. When you use materials that are sustainable and largely acceptable by locals or those who are within the rural area or even in the urban area, as the case may be, I think that will help to reduce the volume of people in the cities. Because you're talking about the density of people in cities. Those are the two angles for which I want to, speak. But then I also think that we need to create much more materials that are, one, affordable, that are accessible, that are much more local and sustainable, such that they can better replace, some of the, materials that are largely imported. So this, for me, are some of the, ways by which we can, use local materials to that would help to reduce the impact of COVID-19 and, of course, other pandemic. I'll leave the ground for others to contribute, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Professor Adewumi, would you like to comment? I see you have some interest in that, right?
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. I think you have rightly responded to the question. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so in Africa, especially if you're looking at sub-Saharan Africa, we've got a huge wealth of material, sustainable material that we can actually use, to address the housing deficit that we have.
I think Professor has been cut off. Maybe you give room for others to contribute.
Hello, can you hear me? I think I was muted, maybe.
Oh, okay, fine. Yes, now I can.
Yeah, so I was talking about in the sub-Saharan Africa, we've got enough of materials that we can use, sustainable materials. But of course, it's so clear that instrumentation is one of our major challenges. And I believe a conference like this can help to establish collaboration with researchers, okay, where we can research our local materials for African application. And I believe that we address a number of the challenges that we have. But I mean, you've rightly answered that we need to look inwards. Imported materials are expensive. We need to look at sustainable local material, what we call appropriate technology, what our environment affords us, we can use. I mean, recently, I've been working on sugarcane bagasse ash. KwaZulu-Natal of South Africa, one of the provinces, they produce sugarcane in very huge quantity. And of course, the bagasse from the sugarcane, from the sugar extraction, it's a major waste. So now we're looking at recycling that waste, sugarcane bagasse ash, in 3D concrete printing. And we are upscaling our 3D concrete printing. In fact, recently, University of Johannesburg with the government of South Africa have gone into collaboration to start building houses using 3D printing technology. 14 Trees is a company recently built about over 50 houses in Kenya, cheap houses, sustainable houses that incorporate all the elements of green building. So I think that is the way to go. Thank you. But I see a question here. Maybe I can quickly respond to this. There's a comment or a question in the chat box asking about the possibility of recycling. Of course, even construction and demolition waste. The project I talked about, the grant we just got from Europe, we're looking at construction and demolition waste and sustainable material for 3D concrete printing. So if you are familiar with 3D concrete printing, you will discover that it doesn't contain coarse aggregate. So it even makes it easier to recycle. You know, if you can recycle conventional concrete where you have coarse aggregate, of course, through a method of separation, much more with 3D concrete printing. And that's what we're looking at in this project. I hope that answers that question. So end of life, definitely we can recycle it.
Okay, thank you, Professor Babafemi, for that contribution. I will want to, before I allow others whose hands are up, I want to put a poster to you that you need to do more to enhance collaboration and probably give us opportunities to have researchers come over from which we could bring it back home for implementation. Thank you. I can see Ankeli has his hands up. I can see Akande Olaide has his hands up. I want to start with, okay, Dr. Adejumo. I want to start with Dr. Adejumo since we are on sustainable materials. He's also a specialist in that area. Dr. Adejumo, please.
Thank you very much to the presenters, and thank you for a great delivery. And for the theme, all the specialists that have spoken, they have done very, very, very well. I was expecting, in fact, I was almost lowering my hand again because the last speaker almost did to answer what I wanted to point out. When we're talking about resilience of the built environment, being the main theme of this particular conference, because what happened immediately after during the pandemic was, apart from the force majeure and a lot of things that led to almost complete cessation of activities in some of the sites, there are sites that imbibe very craft and modern technology of assembly, so that why many people were not on site. Number one, you are dealing with material size, the weight, and also at the same time, the sequence of the sequence of building or laying of material. So in as much as we're not compromising the standard in terms of the required weight, we're also looking at the pace of construction so as to meet up with the contract agreement in delivery. So locally adopted technology, locally sourced material that have been tested. I thank God Bagash Ash was mentioned now in converting it, and especially into this 3D concrete printing. And so I would have loved dwelling on some of the locally available materials or locally materials that have been researched and that could not be commercialized, instead of most of imported materials that are quite heavy. I talk of some fibers that could be induced and into the concrete, rather than these heavyweight steel in terms of that structural material. So once again, technology to material, construction materials, especially the one that could locally source, maybe from different environment, could also be a way, and they properly tested as well to serve, to have the resilience property in terms of their flexibility, in terms of their stability, and also in terms of their enhancement on compatibility with concrete and other build structure that are there. Once again, all the presenters, especially my profs that are presented this morning, and it's quite educative. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we have Olaide Akande for your contribution?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. I want to take us a little bit outside the building material issue as it relates to resilience in the built environment. I understand probably most of us online today are more inclined towards the issue of building materials and how it comes to help with building the environment in post-pandemic era. But I think there's one vital issue I would like some of our keynote speakers to touch on: the role of energy. And when I say electricity in the post-pandemic era, we realize that the pandemic, COVID-19 in particular, reduced interaction between people in space when that occurred, and most of us had to go back into our houses to start operating. And without electricity, which is a major challenge in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, and Nigeria, how do we go ahead? How do we continue our businesses in the built environment, relate with our communities without energy? And how do we build resilience in this respect? That is another line of thought that I think I want to bring to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have, it's getting interesting. Can we have Ankeli? Then after Ankeli, we go to Dr. Golelo. Then we'll come back to Dr. Bilal. Ankeli, please.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, I comment to Professor Kemiki. Yes, we realize that the conventional strategy for property management is no longer sustainable in Nigeria. Hence, we need the contemporary method. Like, as he rightly pointed out, that we need to go virtual. Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead, we are with you.
Okay, we need to go virtual. Signing of agreement online, payment online, and interfacing with the space users. That is good. But my question is, how sustainable can this be in Nigeria? Now that, if you permit me, that apart from the COVID-19 pandemic, we are having other things that, if you permit me, I can use add pandemic to. The Naira redesign pandemic, fuel scarcity pandemic, and a lot of other pandemic that is coming up, even internet pandemic. Because in the course of trying to connect to you, I started from, I think, around after 9. I could not get through. I will come on, internet will take me back, and all this. And transaction in real property entails huge amounts of money, and it requires high level of trust. Now, if you are collecting rent, for instance, and you want the buyers to pay the money using any of these internet platforms, now, how can we build trust that the buyer will pay and transfer the money, and the money will get to you, and for you to confirm that the money that is cropping up almost on daily basis in the country? Thank you, sir.
I think Professor Kemiki will respond to that. Is Professor Kemiki still online? Okay, while we're waiting for Professor Kemiki, I want to say those issues mentioned, it's better, and Kelly, we use the word diseases and not pandemic. Until it becomes a worldwide matter, it cannot be called a pandemic. Since the issue of Naira disease or cash disease is Nigeria, I think we can limit it as an epidemic or disease. and not pandemic. That's on a lighter note. Can we have Dr. Guillermo Delgado while we are waiting for Professor Kemiki's response?
Good. Thank you very much. I think one of the questions that are crucial when we discuss...
Dr. Delgado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. We can hear you.
Yes, very well. Thank you. I think one of the issues that becomes crucial when discussing matters of resilience in large-scale disasters like pandemics is what is who owns those means that are necessary to ameliorate the situation. I listened attentively to the issue of 3D printing of concrete or houses or buildings. I had a question of who would own the equipment? Would the equipment be privately owned, or would it be owned by the local authority or central government, or private sector, or communities themselves? Just to understand how, for example, in the context of Namibia, it could be applicable or not necessarily through the technology, but for example, based on the experience that we have, who was able to respond quicker, who was really able to basically act in a short term. Just a quick sort of piece of background of Namibia. In Namibia, most of the inhabitants live in an urban area, and most of those who live in an urban area live in an informal settlement. That is to say, those are characterized by little services, very low incomes. So that's what I wanted to just clarify when we say that, when we speak about strategies for resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question raised by Dr. Delgado should be addressed by Professor Babafemi. You are the one that took us to 3D printing. He's raising some questions about ownership of equipment, cost of the going into this technology, and the logistics.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. So from your question, who will own or who can own the printer, the 3D printer? The government can. Okay, in South Africa, I mentioned just last week, the government collaborating with the academia, and the government is willing to make purchases. In fact, they can. Of course, you know, the government has programs, okay, for providing housing in to the communities. We used to have what we call the RDP houses, even though now the government has scrapped that. Now they make land available for individuals, but the government can own the printer, all right, and then they can have specialists manning this printer. Then you can have even private companies. A lot of private companies now, like the about 50 houses that were built in Kenya, I think last year. It was owned by a private company, 14 Trees. You can Google and there you can get the details. Very nice, green, sustainable buildings that were constructed. And then even municipalities can actually own these. If they have a program to address issues in their communities, I think even municipalities should go forward to, procuring these printers. Like I said, we have 2 printers now in our laboratory, okay, and they were built by our students, our PhD students. All materials for the printer were sourced locally. So I think it's just getting the right hand to do this. This is actually doable. I hope that that helps.
Thank you, Professor Babafemi. I can see some hands are still on and some have been dropped. I want to confirm, Dr. Bilal, is it that your question has been answered?
No. I actually wanted to respond to some of the questions raised. And that was why my hand was
up. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, I
Please
think I
go
need
ahead.
to respond to Dr. Ankale's question relating to, or someone else's question related to energy, provision, internet, financial issues. I think all of those.
That's for Mr. Akande.
Yes, Mr. Akande spoke about energy, and of course, Dr. Akande spoke about financial issues and internet and all of that. All of those relate to resilience. You cannot have that when you do not have critical infrastructure resilience. These relates, for instance, energy relates to critical infrastructure, internet critical infrastructure. Ordinarily, those infrastructure should be produced, they should be provided for. We shouldn't have issues where you are fluctuating, internet services when indeed you want to try to move from face-to-face learning to e-learning, sort of systems. When you have issues with funding issues, financial issues, these are critical, systems that should be in place even before disaster strikes. Imagine a country that does not have those infrastructure in place and there's disaster. Then how do you respond? The response to be? Is the response going to be holistic? Would it even be impactful? And that's why I gave a typical example of the case of Haiti. Haiti is a country that hardly had its institutions or critical infrastructure working. And so following disaster in 2010, they had serious issues that even led to crisis. And that's why it tends to even result into complex emergency situation, because when you have existing vulnerabilities, the fact that you do not have critical infrastructure in place that supports internet service that will enable this sort of conversation that we are having, or that you have issues with power, these are issues, underlying issues that can even trigger the emergence of certain emergencies. It can make it complex. But then some of the solution is about decentralization. We must not necessarily all be on one grid to ensure that we have energy. You can decentralize, power, for instance, down through the community. So when we do that, we'll be creating some sort of local resilience in terms of, household, community-based sort of resilience as against what you would expect to be provided by the national or the state sort of level. So this basically is my comment. I just feel that we need to go back to some of the questions that I made earlier, talking about critical infrastructure resilience related to one, we talk about engineering resilience, under which we have critical infrastructure resilience, we have technical system product, production processes. So all of these must be fixed in place if indeed we want to bounce back to normal situation, after disaster strike, or even bounce forward, by bringing in place innovative processes that can enable us to, quickly recover from the impact of disaster. This is my submission, please.
Thank you. I want to go to Dr. Renuka now. Our hand has been up for some time. Please, Dr. Renuka, over to you.
Thank you very much. I highly appreciate everyone's contribution here, and it is very, very informative and also like exponentially academic, I would say. And I completely agree with most points presented here, and especially Bilal, who mentioned lately that what is resilience and how we should be addressing resilience. And I feel that, whenever there is any disaster happening, then we think of what is our risk, what are our risks, what are the vulnerability index, or how we are vulnerable. We think about how we will recover these incidents and so on. And therefore, resilience must be our culture. We must be having it into our institutional management and, all processes where we think of long-term and also build in. And for that, I think what we have to do, like build into institutional existing policies and ability to absorb shocks. And when we have this, how we can have this ability, of course, as a estate, like in a building construction, we are highly energy intensive. And that is one point was raised by someone, that how we address energy. And I think we should be having decentralized energy, that is all buildings should be self-sustained. And that is possible in most countries where there is solar energy highly available. It is a question where few countries do not have, but still as in Africa, it is highly potential for solar energy, and that can be definitely on every houses. And and there are plenty of projects going on, which is really good. But what is the thing with and also now, so energy, I think we should be having only self-sustained housing. If we have that way, then only it is possible for us to be having that resilience capacity, high resilience capacity. Secondly, housing or buildings are the core of our life. We are spending now nearly 95% of our time in buildings, whether it could be a work building or a house building or wherever. So within the built environment, and therefore we need to make our building environment as a forest, urban forest. In the sense, we have to accommodate biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and all those things within our built environment. And I think plenty of here speakers have presented these solutions. However, going back to the buildings, what has happened that buildings have a long life. They are owned by individuals, and they are the most precious possession by an individual. And therefore, when individual is comfortable in that building, they do not want to change easily. I mean, readily. They are not really acceptable. The changes are not acceptable. And therefore, we need to make sure that these individuals take leadership in changing their behavior, changing their decisions, and we should be having a support system in a way that that individual is supported through that changes. When they take changes, like moving from the traditional energy to the solar energy, and if they are trying to become self-independent of that energy, then what support systems we have that we can make them confident that when they are changing, they will not be affected or highly affected in a financial way or in a comfort, in their comfort zone and so on. So that support system is very important, and that can be given by government, but also by private buildings and private institutions, because collaboration of private public partnership has been really successful in such things, where I think someone also mentioned about sharing. I think sharing economy is highly interested and will be coming forward as a resource for resilience. That is, we can change the use of the buildings. If we can change the use of the buildings, we can change the operational and functional activities of the building, which would allow us to have that support during when we are going through the transformation and getting resilience status. Along all these, what is highly coming up as virtual, online, and internet-based services. And therefore, I think we are afraid also how we will manage this. There are plenty of doubts of online and other things, but there are successful examples. Like, for example, Sendenter was the one who was able to transform payment system very immediately, or was able to give the help to the people, say, for example, in Hong Kong and Thailand and other places, directly to that the payment went into their account, and therefore there was no loss of money during the supply chain of transferring the money, or there was no fraud and all that. So if that type of flawless system is coming up, then we should all be supporting. But what these all things need, the change in sustainable material, change in sustainable living lifestyle, or change in new technology, we need skills. And therefore, the change in skills is the highest need today. How we adopt to take this, we all have to be a learning, we all have to have a learning element in our workplace now. Our organizations should be learning organizations so that we can go out and research and understand what is the best practices and take it on board. Training, learning, and skills, that is so much important. And when we come to skills, there are some highly high evidence, like large evidence. Ladies, that female gender has a high capacity to multitask and to learn skills very easily. And therefore, I think we need to bring the gender for like female force into the construction industry. However, we know and we acknowledge also, we recognize that building industry has is low in like we do not have female participants so much in our building construction. So that is where we can increase our capacity. And there is also high evidence that if female or a lady of a household is educated and having such skills, then it will flow or it will inherit into the whole family. So these are the few things I wanted to say, and there are several, issues, but I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Renuka, I would have been surprised if you did not bring the issue of female and gender sensitivity in. But I want to tell you, nobody chases away the women from the construction environment. They rather dodge from it because they felt it is more energy intensive and they want the soft spots. Having said that, I observed from Dr. Dodo, one thing that Dr. Renuka has brought back to our knowledge in this roundtable talk is attitude. His response yesterday said something about pandemic and attitude, whether as construction practitioners or as people living in the particular environment. And I think this has been re-emphasized again by Dr. Renuka. I want to bring our mind to Professor James Rotimi, even though I was busy trying to undo some things when he was presenting. But I know New Zealand is a very cold zone.
Dr. Guillermo, your hand is up.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry,
yes,
my network went off.
Yes, I think it was not. I think the previous speaker was not.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Guillermo. I'm back now. So I was saying we should hear from, I expected people to ask questions as regards how New Zealand were able to manage the COVID era. COVID is expected to be prone to be of high intensity in cold zone. New Zealand being a cold region, you should please tell us how were they able to reduce or to limit casualties in New Zealand despite their weather. Professor James, are you there? Professor James Rotimi, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for the question. I think it's, I think we had, one thing was a very simple and straightforward question was we had very good leadership. Leadership from government, in that they were able to be very proactive in, their response to the pandemic. I think another advantage we had, we've always had because of our small economy and our small size, and the fact that we are remotely located, it was easy for government to be able to prevent the widespread of COVID by actually, closing the borders and preventing people from coming in, so that the disease itself was sort of contained. So I think that was one thing that they did, which was good. But I think another thing that is very important for us to note, all of the issues that we have discussed are not issues that can be tackled by just one sector or one professional, or, it's an all hands on deck thing. And where you have a very good leadership, where you have very good government, that is quick to respond and quick to actually act as a catalyst for change and motivation, motivating the different sectors, then the kind of bounce back or bounce forward that we had after COVID would not have been. So for example, the New Zealand government was very quick to provide some hardship allowances, some financial assistance to agencies, financial assistance to even private individuals, so that they could actually come out of whatever recession that may have occurred as a result of COVID. The other thing also that government did, which was, I think, very impressive, was the fact that they were able to step in. One thing we need to know, and I encourage us to go read about this. There would have been some publications around this. Is the fact that the construction contracts that we used to have, or that we still have, is currently undergoing an amendment, did not recognize, did not have any clause there for force majeure. There was no clause in the construction contract for force majeure. And then suddenly we have this widespread pandemic, and everybody was running helter-skelter. Parties to contracts were, didn't know what to do. Contractors didn't know how they were to present their claims and stuff like that. Government had to step in, and they provided guidelines not just for the public sector, but also for the private sector, in a way that they were able to help with claims that came from contractors and from suppliers and so subcontractors and so on. So I think this is, I think from my perspective, I think there was a very significant role that government played in ensuring that the pandemic didn't affect the economy so much, and we were, was able to help the New Zealand economy to bounce back after COVID. So I guess this answers your question, Dr. Lawi.
Thank you, Professor James Rotimi. I want to say one thing I picked from this presentation of yours was actually government response. And this is one thing that seems to be lacking in, especially in our West African zone. I want to say during the COVID era in Nigeria, thank God we are in a hot climate zone. all government did was to put policy in place that restricts the people, and nothing was made available for the people to be able to manage having to live under this restriction and the rest. And at a stage, even the restrictions could not be held because people must go to the open market, people must buy things, and you realize they were more or less copying and pasting policies from other climes rather than looking at our peculiar environment and devising what could work. From the New Zealand experience just shared, I think the lesson from this is we as individual environments needs to look at our environment and devise how to handle situations. For me, the West African zone needs to look more about our available materials. We need to look more about how to solve housing issues, to which we can reduce crowded environment, we can enhance sanitations, and most of the diseases that get widespread could be curtailed, even without having to depend on vaccines or medications to handle the situation. We have really had a nice time. We still have, we have two people. I want to give Dr. Guillermo an opportunity to hear his view. After him, we are going to NITDA Kande. Please permit me to tell us there is a slight change in the updated program we had. There was a little mix-up. This roundtable conference was to be a 3-hour thing, and the presentation sessions was not adjusted to commence after it. It's not possible to have the presentation session while this roundtable talk is still ongoing. So we want to plead that we might have to adjust, limit the roundtable talk to 2 hours for now. Sure. Towards the end, we can still give room for general discussions. So it implies the presentation session will start after the roundtable talk. There will be a shift of about an hour for the presentation sessions. Thank you, Dr. Guillermo. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much. My reaction is the contribution of Dr. Thakore with regards to the need for skills. In the experience of the COVID-19 unit in Namibia during the lockdown, when we were saying that the radio became the most important source of information, radio here in this context is not necessarily experts communicating information to the public. I mean, yes, there is that component which became very useful, but it's also the community members making phone calls to the radio, sharing experiences. That is to say that it raises the question of who is teaching and who's providing the skills. And in the context, I think platforms for mutual learning are really important. What we here call learning exchanges, which speak to something that has become really relevant in the literature on infrastructure and housing, which is the issue of co-production. Housing and services that allows community participation. Why? Well, simply to make an impact and to achieve scale. In the context of Namibia, and as it can be in probably other sub-Saharan African countries, government and professional-led approaches are basically too expensive, and they don't reach scale, and they don't make the necessary input. So I think that enabling mechanisms and technologies and strategies that allow for community participation is an affirmation towards making a broader impact in light of the vast need that exists. I also have to leave in the next few minutes, but I thank you and I wish you a good session moving forward. I will stay for a few minutes, but otherwise, yeah, I wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want Dr. Dr. to be NIGER Kande to hear his view, after which we'll have Ibrahim Yahya, and Dr. Renuka Thakore again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question is to Dr. Delgado. I was hoping you try to provide some little or shed some light on the issue of how Namibia was able to cope or build resilience against livelihood assets, particularly human assets, physical assets, and the natural assets. Being an expert in that field, and if there's any research towards that direction with the advent of COVID-19, because the pandemic we know really affected some of the major livelihood assets of our people, especially in West Africa and Africa at large. Thank you.
Sorry, can I answer that right away? Because I also need to. Thank you. So in the case of Namibia, there was a once-off grant that was disbursed to everybody below the income tax bracket. In Namibia, everybody that earns, if I'm not mistaken, less than about 50,000 Namibian dollars, which is about 2,500 US dollars, is pays income tax. So there's basically, it's very easy for government to basically identify from those registered for income tax who is not registered for income tax. So everybody that was not registered for income tax got a once-off grant of about, I think it was like 1,900 Namibian dollars, which must be about, yeah, let's say 100 US dollars. This made an impact. Some people used it for basically just feeding themselves. Others used it to start new businesses, and others used it to, yeah, for, I mean, many, I guess, just simply spend it without much impact. But what is really important with the issue of livelihoods is to understand that 2/3 of those who are employed in Namibia earn an income in the informal sector. Now, every single state program that exists requires registration of your business, the so-called small medium enterprise sector. But if we acknowledge that 2/3 of those who are making an income do not register, do not have a company, then they cannot reach any state benefit. So this grant proved the point and contributes to issues of social protection and links to the literature on social protection, on the debates on the basic income grant or the universal grant that is being debated in many contexts, that perhaps in the context of sub-Saharan Africa or cases like Namibia, where most people find themselves in the informal sector, basically a large-scale grant issued to as many people as possible without testing means, without, or at least not too many filters, can really make an impact and trigger an economy that otherwise is not reached by state programs. So that in the context of Namibia, the emergency income grant was something that one can say was positive.
Hello, thank you. I believe Dr. Gelnamno, are you done? We have lost him.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I can see Nathaniel Olukotun also. Can we have Dr. Renuka before we move back to Nathaniel? Dr. Renuka.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank Dr. Odelgado for his comments. I rightly agree that unconventional methods of communication have been so common and we have to adopt. And that is what my GSFN is doing, and especially capacity building and exchanging knowledge. And that's how we made this platform worldwide open for especially early career researchers to come on board. We have no at all mandatory requirement for you to be on this platform. And that is so encouraging, I have found, and many of people have joined us. But I would like to say that another point where someone mentioned about who is responsible. I think we are responsible as a citizen, and we have to work in our local area to develop, along with government and private entities, to develop our public good. And what does that mean? Public good is like having an internet, having an energy security, having an housing security in a form that each and everyone has a shelter, having educational security, that everyone is having that provision of quality education. And where there is not, we should also be looking at developing a social capital. And we see this nowadays so many. So we should be open to this all. I know there are plenty of risks, but if we keep on going with this, understanding what are the structures, and there are plenty of successful examples like Uber or BNB and many other. Again, during pandemic, they had an impact, but still we have such collaborative models out, and that is what I think is helping us to move forward. For example, today's conference, we have so many people readily accepting the invitation and contributing to this rich dialogue of sustainability in buildings. And it was organized by this university, but we supported just with technology, and others supported with their knowledge. And these all things can add up. And I would also then later on, when I get chance, I will stop here. I will, if I get chance, I will also throw some light on what activities we can do collaboratively and what success activities we have already done. So that's where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you. We are running out of time. I can observe, we might need to close this session in the next 4 or 5 minutes. We will come back to still have a bit of such discussions towards the end of the session. I'll quickly want Nathaniel Olukotun to hear his view while we round up with Dr. Yakubu Amungu for this session. Nathaniel Olukotun, over to you.
Good afternoon, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and everyone in the house. I really appreciate the committee that put this program together. I've actually learned a lot. I want to talk about sustainability. Somebody asked a question or a contribution about sustainability. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay.
Go ahead, you are on.
Okay. I want to say that we must be proactive and decisive when it comes to sustainability. I actually should have presented a paper yesterday about the use of microorganisms in concrete, although I've not been. It also talks about sustainability. We must be, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, we should be more decisive. And that's what Malaysia did. We must look at what we have in abundance, as has been said by a chairman or someone then, that we should look at cheap materials around us that we can use to help make the environment sustainable. So in Malaysia, for example, Malaysia has a lot of palm fruit, which they got from Nigeria, and they invented POFA, palm oil fuel ash. And presently, POFA replaces about 10 to 20% of concrete. In Nigeria, for example, also, we have a lot of waste glass. A friend of mine had his research on waste glass and PhD research, and he was able to replace cement up to about 10 to 20%, and fine aggregate up to about 50% with the incorporation of microorganisms. So we must be decisive. We must look at it. We must be goal-driven. We must look at what we have and drive it to our present situation. And also, I found out that, yes, we want a sustainable, we encourage the use of sustainable materials, partly because of global warming and other issues that we have around us presently. But even some of the researches that is being carried on at the moment, especially in Africa, are not being followed up. There's not so much of follow-up on these researches. So the researches, some of them are just done for research's sake. So we must also be proactive in terms of follow-up of these researches. And that's why I'm grateful that this conference has been put together. But after this conference, I will expect that the gains of this conference be holistically checked and put into practice, like the 3D printing thing. I don't see any reason why after now, the profs and the supervisors around should encourage students to go into researches on 3D printing. I know that if we do this, we will get there quicker. And also, someone said, an action is better than many words. And when our words is not in tandem with our action, then there will be no movement. So I want us to just look at these two things. We should be proactive. We should be goal-driven. And I believe that this will help us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You will still be given the opportunity to present your paper in the technical session later, so you can talk more about that. I wouldn't want to do any summary on your speech. We can meet after the technical sessions. Quickly, Dr. Dodo, your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for this wonderful panel they've put in place, and thank all the presenters. In a summary, if we all notice what we have been discussing from yesterday to date, all these have been encapsulated in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals. These 17 goals are there for us to, manipulate and use effectively. If you look at these goals, 9 out of the goals reflect the built environment. I have shared my presentation. Is there 9 out of these 17 goals reflects the built environment in terms of energy, in terms of infrastructure. So if we play, if a community or if a state is able to, manage this goal very well, I think we will make progress. As for issue regarding Nigeria, all we need to do is we look at 3 issues. Create more awareness, not Nigeria alone, as well global. We need to create awareness about issues, about residencies, about COVID, about the future pandemic. Then the technology. Thanks to the presenters, we can now see that we can have 3D printer, we can manufacture them locally. That means technology is there, then policy. Most of, Professor Rotimi from New Zealand, he made mention of good leadership. And what will good leadership help us to do is policy. They need to, profile a lot of policy that will help us out, especially in the area of R&D. We need more money to do research. We need to talk to the government. We need to, at the end of this presentation, have the communique sent to the government, sent to the National Assembly. We need more money for research, for R&D. If we're able to do three things: create awareness, harness available technology, get this policy in place, I believe we move forward. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure time will not permit us to exhaust everything that we need to discuss or talk about. I want to say one thing we need to take home. One thing we need to take home, just in the words of Renuka, is that we are all responsible. Responsibility is reposed on us as individuals. Responsibility is reposed on us as policymakers. Responsibility is reposed on us as professionals in the construction environment. We'll be continuing these discussions after the technical session. And I want to plead with you, from the tempo at which we had this roundtable talk, let's all of us put in our own contributions at the technical session to help the researchers in the various environments, and by the grace of God, Africa and the entire world will have a way to handle diseases, epidemics, and pandemics, not depending on medications and vaccines alone. The environment itself could develop a resilience to every attack that comes its way. We'll be breaking now. We'll be going on a short break, and we'll be converging for the technical session by 12:30 West African time. And the sessions will be in 4 streams, as mentioned. We will be sending the updated program within the time of the break. Please, let's check our mails and keep to our time allotted for our presentations. Thank you. Meet you at the technical sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Shortly, we will breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are 4. Just check. Underneath your system, you will name breakout rooms. Yeah, there you can now click, and you can now migrate into the breakout room where you belong or where you wish to actually contribute or present your paper. Thank you. Yes, in the next talk, for now, you can chat with some of the people that you've not been able to see in a long time.
Dr. Dodo, I greet you.
Maoga. Maoga, your cap now supposed to be red. Now red, you're supposed to turn to red chief cap. Still there, brown. Red leg.
And your head is getting bad the more.
My brother, Alabu. I swear to God, Alabu.
No wonder you continue to tour the entire Asia. At the verge of crossing to Europe, you return to the heart of Asia again. What is happening?
I tell you, no, you know, outside we say Damkwali Neja Fula. I have to stay with my wife. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
Because he said, Prof, don't chop up.
I